everyone. My name is Aki Smith, and I'm the founder and executive director of Hope for Stomach Cancer. I want to thank you all for joining us on this first part of this two-part series, Cannabis and Cancer, What You Need to Know. Today's topic is Cannabis 101, the plant and how it works with your body, presented by Liz Rogan. I have to admit, I know very little bit about cannabis. My dad was never really interested in exploring the plant or use it for symptom management. Instead, he used prescription pills to help manage side effects from treatment, which kind of caused him problems down the line. He became addicted to his anxiety medication, and with his nausea medication, he got the black box permanent side effect, which is involuntary tics in his throat. In hindsight, I do wish we would have known all of our options, which is why I think this webinar is going to be so important. But before I pass this along to the expert, I quickly wanted to share some of the resources we do have available here at Hope for Stomach Cancer. If you go to stocan.org, you'll notice that we have tons of different resources for self-navigation. We have a resource library where you could catch all the webinars that we've hosted. You could also receive a Hope in the Bag with a free patient navigational kit. It comes in English and Spanish. You can join our stage 4 support groups with oncologists. Our next one is April 25th. We have a private closed Facebook group at stomachcancersupportfb.org where we can continue this conversation of everything that you hear at this webinar and everything that you want to discuss and some of the things that you're going through. Also, we have more hope webinars coming up in our pipeline. And of course, as always, please sign up for a newsletter. It will really help give you all of our updates and some of this new stuff in the pipeline. So thank you very much. And here's Liz.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Liz Rogan. I'm here to share my love of cannabis with you. I first started in the cannabis industry over 15 years ago. My background is in education. I'm a botanist and biologist. I come from a medical-based family, so I've always been questioned about any plant-based medicine and always back that up with data. So I am very excited to have the opportunity to share this information with you today. I currently work with multiple organizations, and I do consulting with businesses and patients along with physicians to help cater cannabis programs to best suit patients and to create products for patients. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. There's a lot of information to cover. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series here. This is Cannabis and Cancer, What You Need to Know, parts 1 and 2. Today, we're just going to be going on part 1. So we're going to look at the cannabis plant. How does it work within your body? So we're going to go over a little bit here in a short amount of time. So we'll definitely allow questions at the end. So we're going to look at the botany, the history. We're going to look at, is it cannabis or hemp? This question we're all asking. The parts of the plant, how does it work within your body with the endocannabinoid system? What is the legality and the supply chain? So how does that medicine get to you? What are some methods of ingestion of how you would get this medicine into your body? And then we'll take questions. So we're going to start right off here. The Cannabinaceae family, it's the cannabis plant. The order is Rosales. It's actually, cannabis is related to hops, roses, mulberries, family Cannabinaceae. It was, the genus is Cannabis L, that's in Linnaeus. Cannabis sativa includes hemp and marijuana. So this is very important to understand. When we first talk about cannabis sativa, that is incorporating cannabis and hemp. There are subspecies which are, there's arguable indica, cannabis indica is usually more of a drug variety that has short fat leaves. Cannabis sativa is another drug type variety, but also used more in hemp production. And Cannabis ruderalis is a low grade cannabis. It's kind of considered more of a weed, but they're using some of the genetics to breed in with other strains to enhance the amazing things that this plant can do. So we're going to look, is cannabis or marijuana? So, oops, sorry guys. Cannabis or marijuana. So the word cannabis refers to the actual botanical plant, which comes in two forms, marijuana and hemp. So while the plants are virtually indistinguishable, if you were to look at them or hold them, the law does set a very clear difference. Marijuana is illegal and hemp is not. But the word marijuana does carry some negative connotation from the war on drugs. So they try to discourage using that, and we use the term cannabis. So we break that into cannabis and hemp to help kind of keep it clear here. So in this slide here, we're looking at what's the difference, the legal difference between hemp and marijuana, because if we look at the botanical difference, they're actually pretty much the same thing. They're cousins, they're in the same family. So the biggest difference that you need to understand is that hemp contains less than 0.3% THC. So that makes it a legal agricultural product. Cannabis or marijuana is a federally illegal drug still. It's a Schedule 1, and that it contains greater than, excuse me, 0.3% THC. So same exact plant, if it contains more than 3%, then 0.3% THC, that is now a federally illegal Schedule 1 drug, and that's considered cannabis. Whereas if it's less than 0.3% THC, that is considered hemp, that can be sold legally, and it's an agricultural product under the Farm Bill. Hemp does have male and female plants, and cannabis or marijuana usually is only female plants because they have higher cannabis resin production. So let's look at cannabis, hemp, and human history. It has been a long evolution together. Cannabis actually has evolved with people following from Asia across land bridges to continents, and it's pretty neat. Originally, Southeast Asia is where we see the first cannabis come from. If we look at human history, we see in 6000 BC, they found cannabis seeds in China, which were being used as food. 4000 BC, they have textiles. And then in 2027 BC, it's finally recorded in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. So this is a real medication. Oops. Sorry about that. And from 1000 BC until 1883 after Christ's death, hemp was actually the largest agricultural crop and most important industry on the earth. Basically all the fiber, fabric, oil, paper, machines, and it was a key source of essential oil, food, protein. And so hemp was just this thing that was used everywhere. It had so many uses. And it was also in the US pharmacopoeia from 1850 to 1937. So doctors were prescribing it, and this is something you could use, legally without any concerns. So then let's move to US history. And so in 1619 with colonization, they actually had a hemp law in Jamestown colony of Virginia, where it was mandatory for people to grow hemp seed. They actually paid some of their taxes in hemp. It's because this was so important as a resource that they really, really needed it. So especially as they were colonizing America. So there were mandatory hemp cultivation laws going into place in Massachusetts and Connecticut and some other areas that were early colonized. So it was also legal tender on the paper from 1630 to 1800. There was also a huge amount of hemp plantations in the South. They had really large plantations. We know Thomas Jefferson and also had a hemp plantation, and primarily because there were a lot of slaves and a lot of land, they were able to maintain these large plantations. Unfortunately, it also was great for medicine, and was used in so many medicines along with many other plants. But in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act came along, and that restricted possession of it unless you paid a pretty steep tax. And it was for a limited amount of applications. So what happened? How do we go from medicine and this essential food to reefer madness? So as you can see, these were medicines you would find on the shelf, and then all of a sudden it went to reefer madness. So Prohibition and the war on drugs began. So in 1942, cannabis was removed from the US pharmacopoeia. And in 1970, the Controlled Substances Act, marijuana became a Schedule 1 substance, having no medical use and high potential for abuse. In 1971, with the war on drugs, cannabis became public enemy number 1. And it was actually used politically and socially. There was a lot of William Hearst was trying to get into the industry. There was so much hemp, there was no opportunity. So they made some laws and changed it so paper became the currency that we used, or what we used for our currency. It also became a target on certain ethnic groups and groups of people. And also with politics, prohibition was seeming as very kind of pro-Republican. So there was a lot of other things going on in this. It's not just the plant itself, but the DEA was created in 1973. And so from that point on, any research on the medical benefits of cannabis was buried. It's just they did not want to share that. So the war on drugs disproportionately impacted people of color. They were incarcerated at a rate nearly 4 times higher than whites, even though they do use cannabis at the same rate. So cannabis is still federally legal, though some state laws are changing. In California, where I live, we're very lucky, but this is still not the case. And many people are still incarcerated and are being incarcerated every day for cannabis related offenses. So some people can walk around and use cannabis or buy it from a store and sit on the street, but for other people, that could mean life in prison. So it's very important to know legality, and it's important to understand where this plant has come from and what it's gone through. So let's go to the legal side here. Let's look at hemp. So hemp is legal under the 2018 Farm Bill. So they finally said, yes, hemp is legal. If it's under 0.3% THC, go right ahead. And it's one of the only renewable plants on earth that can actually replace all fossil fuels. Hemp has an array of uses, from food, fiber, medicine, fuel, textiles, livestock bedding. It's amazing. Skincare. It's also carbon negative, so it helps fix carbon. It's also a renewable resource. It can grow up to 3 crops a year. And it's a bioaccumulator plant, which is great for soil remediation. So bioaccumulator plant, what does that really mean? So bioaccumulator plants are plants that can absorb toxins from the soil, but they can't excrete them or expel them. So cannabis has this great thing where it moves from the toxins from the roots right up to the shoots. So it's great. It pulls it out of the soil, helps remediation. They've even used it in places like Chernobyl to remediate soil, but that does bring concerns for purity for consumers if this is something that's accumulating toxins. So let's look at this plant. Let's zoom in 30 and 60 times closer to see where the medicinal compounds are produced. So we're going to look closer at the buds. These are the female sex organs of the plant. So they have these things called trichomes. You can see these are kind of looks like a little mushroom top there, but it's an oil gland. And they're concentrated on the female buds in the plant. They're also somewhat on, small amounts of them all over the plant, but the majority of them are concentrated in the female buds. So the trichomes contain over 500 compounds. There's a bunch of cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, alcohols, esters, and a lot more things we don't know of what's going on in there. So this is kind of like opening a crack and looking inside. There is a huge world in there. And so we're just about to go in and discover a little bit of it and see how that brings this plant and what does that mean to you and your body. So trichomes are where the medicine is concentrated. So as you can look at the plant, I think you can see the female bud is that the trichomes have a lot of purposes to attract and repel. They have odors and they're sticky. So they've got a lot of mechanisms going on in here to help the plant grow, pollinate, protect itself against insects and disease. So cannabis, one of the major parts of cannabis that we all know are cannabinoids. So THC and CBD are the 2 main cannabinoids that almost everyone's aware of. There are other minor cannabinoids that they're finding more of as they dig deeper, but the 2 main ones are THC and CBD. And it's important to know that there's a lot of different cannabinoids in the plant. They all have slightly different mechanisms. Some cause psychoactivity, some don't. Some, help with certain conditions. They're still really discovering this because it's very new. The endocannabinoid system, which we'll discuss, was only discovered in the 1980s. So this is all very new research. And as I'd mentioned, it had been repressed due to legality. So it's starting to emerge. There's a lot coming out of Israel. So we're putting this all together. But they're finding benefits from a lot of these cannabinoids, in addition to just, getting you high or anti-anxiety, especially for specific cancers. They're finding that a lot of these cannabinoids working with different terpenes have great mechanism of action. So it's not just THC that's like the most important one, or CBD. There's a lot of other powers that these cannabinoids have. One thing that's important to note here is that when this cannabinoid is on the plant, like THC, it's actually THCA, and that's an acid form, or CBDA, it's an acid form of the molecule. When THC, the cannabis plant, is actually heated, the acid form, so THCA, that acid falls off. And so it's a THC molecule, and now that is psychoactive. So on the raw plant, it's technically not psychoactive, that THC, the raw plant itself. It needs to go through a chemical process called decarboxylation, which removes the acid from either the THCA or the CBDA, and that makes it more available to the consumer. So looking at THC and CBD, because these are the biggest trees that we can see in this forest. So THC, yes, it can get you high. Everyone knows. It also relieves pain. It promotes sleep. It stimulates your appetite. It's neuroprotective. It uplifts your mood, and it causes apoptosis in cancer cells. CBD is not psychoactive, but it is anti-inflammatory. It helps reduce seizures. It helps with anxiety relief. It's also neuroprotective. It's neuroregenerative, so it can help regrow some parts of people have found in the brain from brain injury. And it also mitigates the psychoactivity of THC. So whereas THC is bringing you that high, CBD helps take away some of that high. So they often work really well together. And CBD also inhibits further tumor growth. So apoptosis is programmed cell death. That is where every cell has a life cycle. So cells know it's time to die when it's, they're at the end of their life cycle. So THC, causes cancer cells to basically self-implode. So they decide it's time to die. It's called apoptosis. They kind of crumble up into themselves and are flushed out through your bloodstream. Your liver does a lot of work with that. When you're undergoing chemotherapy or radiation, the cells are killed. So that's necrosis. And it's harder for those cells to be flushed out of your body. It has to do more work because it's not quite a natural process. So apoptosis is really important for cancer cells in telling them to self-destruct. And so where THC is often going in and has been shown in petri dishes to cause apoptosis in cancer cells, the CBD itself helps inhibit any further tumor growth or cancerous changes. So they work best together. And there's still a lot of research that needs to be done to really understand how that works. This is just very basic overall. So now we're going to look at terpenes, because we know cannabis smells. It's got a lot of different smells going on in there. Some people like it, some people don't. They say the nose knows. So if you smell a strain of cannabis and you don't like it, you may not want to smoke it because it may not be helpful for you. But if something is really attractive to you, it might be a good strain for you. And that's because cannabis contains terpenes. Terpenes are volatile organic oil compounds. They are found in anything that has any kind of odor, basically. So there's small molecules, and they're usually together in a combination to make a smell. So that you're going to see plants that you're used to. So lavender, for example, lavender is really high in a terpene called linalool. Linalool is helpful for, relaxation. And so if you have a cannabis strain and it has higher amounts of linalool in it, it'll typically be more relaxing. Let's look at the other side of, like, say, limonene or pine. So if you walk into a pine forest, it often feels like you can take a deep breath. And the reason is you can, because pinene is a bronchodilator. So it actually allows you to take bigger breaths, and opens up some of the openings in your lungs. So it's also refreshing. and awakening. Same thing with limonene, whereas lemon rind or citrus is often something that's like awakening. If you have a cannabis strain and it has higher amounts of limonene or pinene in it, this might be something that's more uplifting for you. It really depends on the person because every single person is different. I might love the smell of something and you might really not dislike it. So it is very much a person by person basis, and there's never usually one single terpene. It's not like, oh, it's THC with linalool. It's a blend of these all together that make kind of a symphony for you. But it's important to note that these terpenes are here. They not only have effects, but they also have really strong medicinal value. Some like caryophyllene, which is in black pepper, and is very good for anti-inflammatory and also for anti-cancer. Myrcene, which is in hops and lemongrass and mango, is actually very relaxing. So a lot of these terpenes come into play they work together with the cannabinoids to bring you a full effect. So as I was saying, there's a lot of terpenes. The ones that were there were just the main terpenes. There's so many. They exist in all plants and even some insects that have a smell. And they do have not only effects like on our nose and other things, but they do have medicinal effects in terms of in our body. So the entourage or the encore effect. So it's important to note that these things don't operate in isolation. As you saw in that trichome, everything's combined in that little circle. So the cannabinoids and the terpenes together create this entourage effect. Essentially, they're trying to show you here that this is why it's important to have all parts of the plant. One of the biggest challenges in studying cannabis has been that all of these parts come together to make this happen. And with big pharma, they usually isolate things. So they look at certain things to see how it works. But the problem is because when you isolate everything, it doesn't work exactly the same as when it was together. And so even by removing some of the parts and trying to put it together, they're sometimes not finding the same reaction or same results. So, but they're also working within the system that we have. So to get products to people and provide these to people, these are some of the products that are on the market. And I just want to explain to you what full and broad spectrum mean, because you will see this when you purchase things. So full spectrum means the cannabis, the extract, and it does have low levels of THC. So all of those compounds are in it, or nothing's taken out. It's just extracted out of the plant itself. On a broad spectrum CBD, they have all the properties except for the THC. So they have taken some pieces out. So it's kind of like a Swiss cheese. They took some out. People are hoping that it's still going to work the same, but there is definitely a school of thought and some research showing that CBD and THC work best in combination. But sometimes you have to, if you have drug testing or other reasons that you're not allowed to have any THC, this may be the best option for you. Cbd Isolate. So essentially, isolate is when they remove everything else. So it's basically like if you were to take an apple, or then you were to take like a little pile of vitamins, like you'd have, vitamin C powder and fiber. And so that's taking just one piece of that, like that vitamin C powder. That's your isolate. Again, it may work, and in some cases definitely helpful. It may not have the same effect as whole plant. And hemp seed oil. Hemp seed oil is just extracted from the seed of the plant. It's really helpful for nutrition, tons of omega acids, and great for adding to your nutritional profile when you're fighting cancer. But you should note it does not work the same as CBD. It's a different oil completely. So just to so you're clear when you see products in the store. So this just illustrates, again, looking at the full spectrum, where with the terpene profile, you're having a huge amount more of these oils. So it's a lot more variety. There's a lot more nuance, and versus where sometimes they'll take like a CBD isolate and then they'll add in certain oils like linalool and limonene. But the thing is that exactly the same? Sometimes we have to make do with what we have, and you need to find what's best for yourself in the situation. But you should know that this is important to know, especially with treating yourself with cancer. A lot of people kind of stick towards the whole plant. This is really important to have biodiversity in different strains. They call them cultivars because even different crops can have different amounts of cannabinoids, terpenes, and other compounds. So it's really based on that. Like certain cultivars, smell like strawberries, where other ones smell like pine. And so, like we talked about with the different effects, not only from the terpenes, but also from the cannabinoids. Um, that varies, and every single person is different. So one might work really great for you, might work different for me. And so certain strains where cultivars are working better for certain ailments. Research is showing that certain cannabinoids and certain terpenes and certain combinations seem to be more effective for certain cancers. For an example, a woman with ovarian cancer had a researcher in Israel working, and she had found that this one strain, potentially Dream Queen, was the best that was for her ovarian cancer. So they're looking into that more to make that oil for her. So it's interesting because they're really finding a lot of correlation between certain strains and certain cancers, and genetic testing is becoming part of that research. It's really important too on like a biodiversity and overall health perspective to avoid monoculture, because that huge amounts of one thing just allows for major pest and disease outbreaks. So that requires a lot of sprays. It can also really upset the supply chain for people who need their medicine. And diversity is the strength of life. It's really important. This is what helps make us more resilient. So it's important to find also, if one cultivar doesn't work well for you, try something different. They're certainly not all the same, as you can see. So indica or sativa, this is a big topic. Everybody wants to know, and it's somewhat of a bogus classification. So it's good not to get stuck in this, but for cannabis, indica is typically something that's considered more of a couch crasher. So it's considered more of sleepy time cannabis. And sativa is considered more of daytime or awakening cannabis. So there are certain plants that grow, these plants grow differently. They grew this way because of the environment they grew in, they created in. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little trip together. So get in my airplane. Here we go. Okay, get out. We're in Southeast Asia. So we're going to look around at the environment. There's all tall plants. We're in a canopy we can see the canopy of the rainforest. So it's very humid. The plants have long, thin leaves. This allows the moisture to drip off of them. It also allows them to catch sunlight through the canopy. They have a very long growing season, as it's summer for a very long time near the equator. Their buds grow really long, tall, and conical, kind of airy, so they don't have mold because it's a very moist environment. They also smell a lot like they have the smells like limonene, because limonene is actually a mold retardant. And so these strains are typically Jack Hare, Durban poison. These are known as landrace strains, and these are more some of the old school strains. So that is technically a sativa overall, but it is really the terpenes that are causing the effects to make it that way. Indica, on the other hand, so let's get back in the plane and okay, get out. We're in the Hindu Kush Mountains. So let's look around. We're on the top of a mountain. Everything's really small and craggy, and little trees are trying or dwarf. It's a short growing season. So these are short plants. They have a really woody stalk. They've got short fat leaves, little round buds. They're finished way faster because they have a really short growing season. So in about 6 to 8 weeks, they're completely gone from full flower, whereas the sativas, on the other hand, are taking a lot longer, up to 12 weeks. So typical terpenes in the indicas are sweeter, and a lot of that goes to pollination. Typically, if you think about this plant on a mountaintop, it wants to get its pollen to another plant that's the same kind. So by having sweet, sugary terpenes, this allows insects to target different pollination, go from patch to patch, and so it helps ensure pollination. It's a strategy. They also have overall relaxing effects and may cause drowsiness due to the terpenes in them. Some popular cultivars are Granddaddy Purple and Skywalker OG. So but the takeaway here is that there is some difference between the strains. Cannabis originally started in different places. But at the same time now, most things are hybridized. There is very little strains that are either a true indica or a true sativa. And they've made hybrids to help blend a lot of the best of both strains, because sometimes sativa can cause anxiety a little bit if people who are really kind of highly wound up or prone to that. And then on the other side, indica can make you kind of be tired. And so that might not be good for you. So they've done a lot of breeding to cross this all. And hopefully this helps give you a little information about indica or sativa. So how does cannabis work within the body? So, okay, so our body actually makes its own cannabinoids, and they are called endocannabinoids. So it creates a feeling of bliss. It's the anandamide molecule, and this was discovered in the 1980s by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam of Israel. Phytocannabinoids are plant-derived, so that's what we're talking about, these cannabinoids, the THC and CBD. And then there's also synthetic cannabinoids that are created in the lab, usually like Marinol and others like that. There are synthetic cannabinoids that are on the street now. Some are Delta 8 and some others. They have been synthesized from hemp. It is not any kind of regulated activity. So I suggest you steer clear from synthetic cannabinoids unless it's prescribed by your doctor. So basically, these cannabinoids attach to different receptors that we have all throughout our body. They just discovered this endocannabinoid system in the 1980s and started teaching it in medical school. So it's a really new thing. It's basically the endocannabinoid system helps regulate a lot of our processes, from appetite, pain, pleasure, and more. It's throughout the entire body, a lot of cellular surfaces. There's Cb1 and Cb2 receptors. We have two different kinds of receptors, and they're located in different parts of the body. Different receptors connect with different cannabinoids better. So you can see here, this is kind of shows you Cb1 receptors are primarily in the brain and the central nervous system. And then Cb2 receptors are usually on like the organs and the outside of the organs and with the immune system. So what that means is THC has a lock and key fit with the Cb1 receptors. So how it works is there's basically these neurotransmitters are going, and THC allows them to plug in like a lock and key fit. So it can turn certain things on, turn certain things off. CBD comes in and it actually is a blocking force. And so it can change the shape and the size of the receptor, which will allow more or less neurons to go through. And so it modulates it, but they work together in basically like turning off and turning on these tiny neurons throughout our body. And that has some pretty significant effects in our body, specifically helping fight cancer. And so what does cannabis do that helps fight cancer? First off, it causes apoptosis, which we talked about is a programmed cell death. It's also neuroprotective. So it protects other cells while traditional chemotherapy and radiation are happening. It helps protect other cells from further cancerous tumor changes. It's also anti-emetic. It helps alleviate nausea and vomiting. It helps reduce anxiety. It helps induce sleep, and it helps with pain. And that's a big one. So how do I obtain medical cannabis? Because we just talked about this a lot. So how am I going to get this cannabis that I need? So first off, check the legality to see what options are available in your area. Depending on where you're tuning in from, that varies greatly. If you live in California, where I live, you can walk into a retail dispensary, order delivery. This might be an option for you. Just to let you know, if you were to walk into a retail dispensary, you do have the ability to look at the products before you purchase them, and you can speak with someone for advice. They sometimes offer discounts in person, like senior discounts or veterans discounts. You can also order a delivery. You can select the products online and they're delivered to your door. So that is something, if you're in a state that allows medical cannabis or adult use cannabis, this is a way that you can obtain it. So medical or recreational cannabis, what's the difference here? So basically it's the same quality of cannabis all across. There's not any different. It's not that this is medical cannabis and this is recreational. Recreational is just the term they use for adult use cannabis, which means 21 and over. Medical cannabis can be used 18 and over with the doctor's recommendation. This may require a card from your state, which often costs money. Typically, a doctor's recommendation costs money, but you may get a discount for being a medical patient at a medical dispensary or a dispensary. So that might save you money. You can also potentially get higher milligram edible products, which may be able to save you money. And you can access all dispensaries. So you could go to medical or recreational dispensaries. But if you were to go to the adult use or recreational dispensary, they have the same products. There's no difference in the testing of anything. Typically, the state, if it's legal, limits the THC milligrams per edible to 100 milligrams. They often have certain laws. So the medical benefit may be that you could get, say, 1,000 milligram, so you can get a higher dosage. But otherwise, pretty much for the most part, they are pretty much the same. There's no doctor recommendation required to walk into the recreational dispensary. The doctor recommendation is something that's kind of become pretty vague also. A lot of times you can go online and just get this recommendation, which is a card. A doctor can't technically prescribe you cannabis because unless they were prescribing you Marinol, because it's a Schedule I drug, so they cannot prescribe that for you. A doctor writes a recommendation that says, you know, Liz is under my care and I understand that she's using cannabis for these conditions. And so certain states have certain conditions that they consider are qualifying and not. It's unfortunate for patients because, as you know, I'm sure, you know, every individual is different and you want to be able to obtain your medicine. Making these legal challenges is just harder for people overall and for patients who suffer the most. So let's look at the supply chain. So cannabis is tracked from seed to sale as it's grown and processed. It goes from a licensed cannabis business to a licensed cannabis business. So it starts with at the grow, which is the cultivation site, the farm. You know, they either ship it off to a lab where they extract all the oil on it, or they trim it up and they make it into edibles and gummies and package it and label it, and then they bring it to a distribution center. And then the most important step in the supply chain happens. At the distribution center, it's quarantined and is sent to a lab for lab testing, a testing lab. And that is the most important thing. If it does not pass lab testing, then it's supposed to be destroyed. Anything on the retailer shelf should have passed lab testing to ensure that it's safe for patients. There is some recall. There will be recalls, and there have been recalls with cannabis products as we are learning, but like we'll find as we learn. But lab testing is really, really important. This is one of the most important things they talk about from, you know, kind of the illicit market to the legal market. So in California, all cannabis products has to pass really strict testing down to parts per billion. So you might say, why is this important on some things? You know, people have used cannabis before that may have had pesticides and other things in it. But the thing is, like, this is a plant that's an inhalable. So it may have pesticides and other things on it, which can turn into dangerous gases when you're smoking them, when they're lit or heated. And especially if you're wanting to use this as medicine, you know, it's important that, you know, you don't have mold or yeast or anything that you're inhaling. It's important that you know what's in this product. So if they're telling you it's, you know, 20% THC, you know, because that's important. Also what terpenes are in it. And then when they extract it into an oil, they sometimes they use certain solvents. So they have to make sure they're all taken out of that. So lab testing is key. It's one of the most important things. And so they do something called a certificate of analysis here. This is just an example of one, but if you look at a certificate of analysis, you should be able to click on the QR code at the bottom, and that would take you to the lab. It just talks about total THC, total CBD, and it'll tell you these other cannabinoids that are in there that we've spoken about, which are often in very small amounts, but that may have some benefit to you. So how do I choose this right product? How do I know what to choose? There's so much information. So the first important questions that you want to ask yourself is, have you discussed this with your medical professional? You definitely want to talk to that person who, before you make any changes, especially if you're in a cancer treatment program or others, you definitely don't want to stop any treatment without speaking with them. Then you want to think about for yourself, what methods of ingestion are you open to? Some people are not open to smoking, whereas smoking might be helpful for your condition. If that's something you're not open to, or it's not possible for you, that's important to note. Then what methods of ingestion are best for my condition? Certain conditions respond better to certain methods of ingestion. For example, some prostate cancer and colon cancers respond better to suppositories, rectal suppositories. That might be something that, might not be your first choice in method of ingestion, but if it's something that's best for your condition, that might be something you'd want to consider. And then what products or methods of ingestion are not available to me? This may matter legality wise. You may not be able to smoke where you live. You also may have limitations on THC. Or if you don't have a stomach, you're limited to certain products that are not edibles. And so it really depends on the person by person. So first you want to start with yourself. And then we're going to talk about the methods of ingestion here, because the most important thing is the onset, the duration, basically overall. So we're going to start with inhalation, as this is one of the oldest and kind of most common methods of it, and that's smoking cannabis flower and leaves. So usually you will feel that within 0 to 5 minutes. You're going to have the effects, and that's direct inhalation of the smoke from burning cannabis flower. So it is combustion. Typically it uses, like, people use like a joint. They roll up the cannabis flower in a paper, or smoke it in a pipe, or these other things you've probably seen. And that's typically a high temperature. It's burning that cannabis. So as soon as the fire touches it, all of those cannabinoids and terpenes are vaporized and just gone. So if you've like burnt cannabis and you go to light it again, you've actually already burnt off all of the medicine, and what's left is just plant material. You do want to be careful with smoking cannabis flower and leaves, because that can lead to COPD and some other issues if you have lung issues, but it has shown in some research not to cause cancerous changes in your lungs. You can also vaporize cannabis flowers and leaves, and that's direct inhalation of cannabis vapor that's caused by the hot air, which is heating the cannabis flower. So it basically brings the cannabinoids and terpenes to their boiling points. This is considered a lot healthier by most doctors. Some things about direct inhalation, the great thing about this is you have almost immediate onset. You'll have full effect within 30 minutes or less, and then the effects can last like 4 to 6 hours depending on the person. This is really helpful if, say, you're experiencing a bout of nausea or really extreme pain. If you need, you can take a hit off your vape pen. You can smoke a hit of this joint, and it can help have effects immediately, and that within about 4 to 6 hours that's going to wear off. But it won't last for it won't last for a very long time. Whereas if you were to go to so let's continue on vaporization. The thing about inhalation is it usually hits you pretty quickly, but it has a shorter duration than some other methods. So there's also the oil vaporizer pen. So the difference between the smoking and the vaporizing that we just talked about, those were using cannabis flower. This is we're talking here with the oil vape pen, and then the dabbing of cannabis oil is they're using concentrated cannabis oil, and they're basically vaporizing it. So this is helpful because it is not burning. There's no combustion there. There is a variable temperature, which is nice. So you can vaporize it at a lower temperature. So you can get that way you can kind of get more cannabinoids and terpenes, because a lot of them boil off at a very pretty low temperature. So if you can use a lower temperature to vaporize them, you can capture more of that medicinal value. The challenge with some of these oils is you'll see you've probably seen them. It looks like a cigarette or an e-cigarette, but it's there's oil that's put in a cartridge, and typically they take a concentrated THC oil that's a single THC oil, and they add other oils into it for flavor and for viscosity. And so the thing is, there hasn't been really long-term research on on this. There has been challenges when people put vitamin E in some of these pens, but they were not legal from the legal market. But vape pens are great because they're really helpful. They're really discreet. They don't smoke and they don't smell. But the thing is, they really don't know a lot about the long-term use of these. It's great if you need some immediate relief. You're in the hospital, you're having a bout of nausea, you're, in horrible pain and you need to take a hit. This will get you there. And that's helpful because it's like anything. They all have side effects. You're just trying to choose what's the best for yourself. So it's very important with the oil vape pen that you would get that from a licensed cannabis dispensary or a very trustworthy company, because this oil often sits in these cartridges for a long time, and those oils can cause the cartridges to leak lead into them. So it's important to know your source with this. And then dabbing cannabis oil, you've probably heard of people talk about this. And basically dabbing means that they're using a very concentrated cannabis oil and they use a tiny dab of it. So basically it's incredibly high THC oil. They're heating something up very, very hot, and then they touch the oil to it. It vaporizes instantly. It's a very high temperature, and they use very concentrated oil for that, because the more concentrated the cannabis oil is, the higher the temperature it needs for vaporization. So this is not smoking. It is something that I would caution most people to not use unless you have very strong medical need for it. It's typically over 90% THC. It can render you pretty much useless. It's really only needed in strong times for pain and other circumstances. This isn't really something you would be doing daily for the most part, as it's very concentrated. Then we're going to look at sublingual and buccal. You can put this in your mouth. So let's see. So the great thing about this is no smoke. So a tincture also comes in oral sprays, but that's usually an eyedropper bottle or a spray. They're made with cannabis extracts, and there's a rapid onset because sublingually under your tongue or buccally in your cheek is one of the fastest ways of absorption into your body. It rivals suppositories. So those are the two fastest methods of ingestion into your body, aside for an injection. So tinctures are great. They're rapid onset. You would drop it under your tongue or inside of your cheek and hold it there. It absorbs. It's usually oil, alcohol, or glycerin based. They're great to dose accurately, because it's sometimes with smoking cannabis, you're not exactly sure how much you smoked and what was the dosage, where you can look at exact milligrams with tinctures. They also have a long shelf life, and they usually have pretty simple ingredients, like no added sugars or other things like some edibles do. There's also dissolvable strips and tablets that you can put under your tongue or in your cheek, made with cannabis extract. And the good thing about these is they usually have rapid onset. So just like inhalation, it's almost immediate onset of the effects. They peak at about 30 minutes, and they may last like 4 to 6 hours tops. So then let's apologize here. Okay, so let's look at food, edibles, and drinks. So cannabis-infused foods and drinks include soda, candy, gummy bears, chocolate, baked goods, condiments, barbecue sauce, you name it, they have it. So this is really important to know about for edibles and drinks, is that the onset of time is 30 to 60 minutes. You won't feel the full effects until up to 3 to 4 hours, and the duration is usually 6 to 8 hours. Why is this way? It's because the cannabis travels from the stomach to your liver before it enters into the bloodstream and the brain. So the liver converts the THC, which is its natural form is delta 9, into a stronger form, like changes the molecule a little bit to delta 11. And this adds to the intensity of the high. So that's why when you've had the typical thing where you take an edible and, it seems to be a lot stronger than other things, it actually is. Your body is magnifying that strength of it. So for this reason, it is very, very important to start with a low dose of edibles and increase that dosage slowly. A microdose is usually 2.5 milligrams of THC. That is considered the average threshold of psychoactivity for someone who's never used cannabis before. It's 2.5 milligrams. So 2.5 milligrams or below is a great dose to start with for an edible if you've never used cannabis before. Even if you have, you may want to start with very low doses the key to almost all medicating with cannabis medicine is you're taking the least amount of medicine you can to get the maximum effect. So with edibles and drinks, I just want to mention one more time that it does take often up to an hour or more to feel the effects. So this is great if you want to use cannabis for sleeping at night. You can take it right before you go to bed. It will process and then you'll sleep all night. You'll wake up in the morning not feeling groggy. Whereas if, you smoked some cannabis before you went to bed, that might wear off. So you might wake up. But if you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't want to eat an edible because that, with putting that duration at 8 hours, you're probably going to wake up feeling groggy or medicated. There's also the topical method of ingestion is one of my favorites. I feel like it's very effective for spot treatment areas. So basically you're using oil. It's a concentrated oil that's infused with cannabis. This includes like all the balms, creams, rubs, salves, massage oil, there's face masks, there's bath bombs, you name it, they have it. There's also there's transdermal patches now also. The efficacy on them is not quite proven, but some people like them. So this is a concentrated cannabis oil. It's blended with other oils to help enhance the absorption. Usually with a lot of other oils and essential oils, which help, with different effects. And typically topicals have no psychoactivity. They are hard to use for certain like large areas. Like if you've got pain in your knee, sometimes it's helpful, or a specific, area. But if you're dealing with arthritis, you're better off taking a tincture because that's going to be body wide. You can also consume raw cannabis. This is not really well researched, but there's definitely patients who use this and have reported great results. Essentially, you're taking that raw cannabis off the plant. So whether it's a flower or a leaf, it should have little to no psychoactivity. As I mentioned, it's THCA. So it's on the plant. It's still in the acid form, which they found to be a really good medicine. People take the plant, they blend it up with a little water and they drink it or put it into a smoothie, or some people eat leaves. Other people have also put it in capsules and taken them. There's supposedly little to no psychoactivity, but this is not really known. This is a kind of a more off the beaten path treatment, but it's something that people do. So then suppositories. So the onset of suppositories is very rapid, less than 10 minutes, usually lasts about 6 hours or so. They're used both vaginally and anally. They're helpful for many conditions, from cramps, endometriosis pain for women, very helpful for prostate cancer and colon cancer treatment for men and women. They are a direct method into the bloodstream and they bypass the liver. So less psychoactivity. Like I said, they go in there, they don't have to go through your liver. So you can potentially take higher doses of THC and not have as crazy psychoactive effects as if you ate an edible. And it's also shown to be helpful for treating cancers below the belly button. This is still somewhat method of ingestion in the research world. And so more will come with that. But this has been really helpful for a lot of people who weren't able to use edibles. Weren't able to consume edibles orally. They were able to get some relief for this. So key points here to go over: cannabis has evolved with and been used by humans for centuries for so many products. Cannabis sativa is hemp and cannabis, which is used to be called marijuana. Hemp is less than 3% THC, and that's federally legal. Cannabis has greater than 0.3% THC, and that is illegal, as it's still a Schedule I drug federally. The war on drugs created mainstream stigma, which had political and social effects on society and also on the effects of research for cannabis. And all products are not the same. So look for the certificate of analysis with the lab test results. Cannabis works synergistically with our bodies to our body's endocannabinoid system. It's kind of neat because we haven't found any other reason for the endocannabinoid system and any other. It's just so neat how humans have evolved this endocannabinoid system, and then the cannabis plant has cannabinoids to plug into it. It's very interesting and synergistic. Cannabis has many compounds that are still being discovered. As I said, research was suppressed by Prohibition, but the compounds in the cannabis plant work best in combination. basically looking at a whole plant medicine as compared to isolated forms. Cannabis and terpenes are helpful for fighting cancer and undergoing cancer treatments, in addition to many other ailments. Certain cannabinoids and terpenes are more effective for certain conditions in certain individuals. It's kind of like ibuprofen might work well for you, but Aleve might work well for me. It's just very different with everybody. So don't ever compare yourself to someone else. Someone else might say, this worked great for me, and you tried, it doesn't work at all. It's just that everybody is different, but it's important to talk with other people who are, and use these support groups like Aki has, who, to talk with other people who are undergoing the same issues you are, because you can definitely help each other. There's that lag in research, and patients supporting patients is what's helped us find a lot of this information out, as research was challenged. As with laws now, there are more opportunities for research. The government is opening it up, even a lot more overall research is being done, even by some of the drug companies are starting to get into the cannabis world. So there are multiple methods of ingestion with varying effects, onset and offset. So it's best to choose what's best for you. Also with cannabis dosing overall, you want to start with the lowest dosage for yourself. 2.5 milligrams is considered a microdose. So if you've never used cannabis before, I suggest that you start with 2.5 milligrams or less, and you increase that dosage in very small increments of 2.5 to 5 milligrams. Typically, a gummy or things will come in 5 or 10 milligrams. It's important to remember that you can break that down, and that 10 milligrams is a significant dose, so you might feel that. So again, the goal is to get the desired effect, the least amount of medicine. Cannabis, like anything, it has some side effects, and but we do feel that they're reduced compared to some other medications. And overall, you're trying to, increase the quality of life of all of us here and eliminate suffering. So choose licensed products if you can that are properly tested and labeled. It's important to consult with a healthcare provider before you make any changes. Please do that. Don't stop doing something and start taking cannabis. And I want to note that it has been shown that conjunctively cannabis helps support cancer treatment. It works better in conjunction with it than either by itself. Cannabis may have the potential to treat some symptoms of illnesses, but more research is needed. I mean, a lot of this is anecdotal. We all want to grab onto hope and things, but it's important to educate yourself and be an informed consumer. Cannabis medicine allows you to be in a little more control of your health, and you have to pay attention to your body to do that. Cannabis is also just one part of a treatment regimen. It includes nutrition, mental state, exercise, and what you're ingesting into your body. So here's some more resources for patients, and I will provide these to Aki also, so they'll be available for you afterwards. But these are some great resources I've found to support patients, that give you information about lots of different ailments and illnesses. They'll also link you to other groups or other places for information, but they're good sources of information. United Patients Group is an excellent place that's been operating for a long time. Project CBD was an original organization that provides really basic information and can help direct you further. MCR Labs kind of talks about they have a lot of great definitions and explain more about cannabinoids and what these things mean. Leafly talks about different strains and cultivars. That's helpful. And Weed Maps is a place where you can look at menus to see what is available around you, dispensary wise. Not all people have access to this, and you may be buying CBD products online or getting them from a place that may not be licensed. So I just encourage you to, knowing that cannabis and hemp are bioaccumulator plants, to try to choose the best medicine for yourself. So my name is Liz Rogan. I thank you for sitting through this talk. I'm sure you probably have some questions, since I know I sped through a lot. There's so much to go over. And next month, we'll be going over dosage for certain conditions. We'll look at certain research, certain cannabinoids and strains for certain cancer and specifically stomach cancers and solid cancers. We'll be looking a lot deeper in that, and we'll also hear from a few patients with their personal stories. So I'm going to open it up for questions now. I'm Liz Rogan. I'm happy to meet with you privately. You can schedule a consultation on my website at lizrogan.com. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll go to the questions right now. Okay, so let's see. Brittany says, are there any specific strains known to have an effect on gastric cancer? That is, gastric, off the top of my head, I don't know of a certain strain that's great for gastric. I really don't. I don't know of any research that's been done on specific strains with that. You would really want to, and then there's different cancers, different gastric cancers, and then it's also important if you're on like what treatment you've taken before, because there are counterindications with all medications. Cannabis should not be taken things, especially immunotherapy. There's some question there in terms of whether cannabis can slow down the immunotherapy response. And so they're really still learning a lot, especially because of the medications that the cancer drugs that they're giving people. And so a lot of times, honestly, it's like a case by case basis. You would want to look into that a little deeper, the specific case. Information on RSO. So Rick Simpson oil is a really concentrated oil, and it's essentially a whole plant oil, like we were talking about whole plants. So they take the cannabis oil and they use an alcohol to extract it, and it comes out as a thick, dark, tarry substance. And that's a really thick oil. It's like molasses but black, and that is known to be, there's a gentleman called Rick Simpson. He was a Canadian, and he made this oil and says he cured his cancer with it. Now, it's very important to not say cure cancer, because everybody has different you don't want to make those claims. But Rick Simpson oil is a very high concentrated THC oil that has been shown to be very effective for some forms in helping some forms of cancer. And it's considered one of the oldest, like in addition to raw cannabis, one of the oldest forms of cannabis medicine. It's important that it's lab tested. And a lot of times when they make Rick Simpson oil, RSO, it's also been called Phoenix Tears, Lazarus oil. There's a lot of other words for it, but or medical cannabis oil, I've heard. So it's got a lot of names. But the thing is, like we'd said, cannabis is a bioaccumulator plant. And then when you're extracting it, you're using a solvent, which is alcohol, or some people use butane and other things. It's important to make sure all of that solvent is out of that. And so just choose a source that or if you can grow your own and make your own. It is a challenge for patients with that, but Rick Simpson oil is an excellent cannabis concentrate and can be added to make tinctures, to make topicals. It can be added into food. It can be used pretty much. It can be ingested from oral, topical, rectal, vaginal. It can be inhaled if you smoke it. So Rick Simpson oil is great. And we'll definitely talk more about Rick Simpson oil in our next talk. Did you say not to use edibles if you have no stomach? Well, the thing is, it's not going to process through your stomach with edibles. So I wouldn't use edibles if I didn't have a stomach. I would suggest you use either, if you're doing a feeding tube, you would use like an oil tincture would be your best bet. Or you can also add it into your mouth and do it sublingually and buccally. You don't need to have a stomach to do that usually. Suppositories are also a great option for trying to treat cancer in different areas if you don't have a stomach. Dawn says, when we wanted to try RSO, we had difficulty finding a doctor to help us with dosing. How do we find a local medical professional for this? It depends on where you lived on in the area. I can help. If you want to contact me, if you want to drop me an email, I can try to help you find someone. United Patients Group might help provide information about where to find someone in the local area. A lot of it is legality. If it's not legal, then the doctors often will not touch it because they're afraid of losing their medical license and other things. And also my father's a physician, and he said, their goal is they took the Hippocratic Oath to do the least amount of harm to the patient. So if they don't know, sometimes they're not comfortable to recommend it to a patient. So Ian says, we understand that cannabis is immunosuppressant. How do we hear about it boosting the immune system? How does it work? Okay, so cannabis actually can help boost the immune system in some ways. It's actually kind of interesting if you look at, they've shown recently information has come out about CBD treating COVID. So the immunosuppressive things of cannabis it basically varies per situation, I guess, because as we've said, this is so complicated, what's going on within this plant. THC itself, large amounts of THC can start to suppress immunomodulation, but the other components in the plant may boost it, like CBD. What's important, the most thing with immunosuppressants and other things, is that it's also important about what other drugs you're taking, because CBD has an effect on your cytochrome P450, which is how people metabolize medication. So often you could be taking, like, say you're taking a cancer medication and a breast cancer medication, and you want to be making sure their doctor's giving you this orally, they're understanding that amount is going to be released into your blood based on that dosage. But by taking large amounts of CBD at times, that can slow down the release of that medication into your system. So what's in the bloodstream may not be exactly what you're taking or what they think you're getting. Specifically with Coumadin, that's important. Most people don't take Coumadin anymore, different blood thinners, but that was an issue with Coumadin. It's not dire, but the thing is, cannabis also helps regulate your blood sugar, and cannabis causes the munchies. So there's a little bit there's a lot of questions, sort of, I guess, where cannabis seems to have dual mechanism, and they call it's biphasic. It's sometimes where too much of something, there's like a sweet spot where too little doesn't do anything, and too much has a negative effect, but there's that sweet spot. So that's kind of the best way I can give you an answer about the immune system. Different cannabinoids, different terpenes, working with different immune system function. But is what promotes homeostasis in your body and balance. Cannabis can be part of a healthy lifestyle. June says, my GI specifically told me my stomach issues were being caused by cannabis. Does that make any sense? Yes, that does, June. Cannabis there's a certain part of the population, people have somewhat like either an allergy or they're not sure, but there's something called Cannabis Hyperemesis syndrome. And it's really important to know about this because there's certain people who have stomach issues, and they use cannabis because it's supposed to help with nausea and other things. But in certain people, cannabis can cause horrible stomach pains. They say it's like Edward Scissorhands, like you're being cut with your stomach. It sounds absolutely horrible. And it often comes with bouts of vomiting. Typically people who have this condition are using cannabis and high amounts of cannabis. They find that being in a hot bath will actually help relieve some of the results. But a lot of these people have been presenting in emergency rooms since there's cannabis more widely available. And the doctors were puzzled, but then they found out that it's hyperemesis. So it's almost like an allergy, but your body is basically having a reaction to that THC. And so it is, as soon as you stop ingesting THC, that will stop. It's unfortunate because there's some people who are taking cannabis for other issues, and then like for chronic pain, and then hyperemesis syndrome comes and they're not able to use cannabis, or at least THC. And so there's different methods of ingestion that may help alleviate that. But at the same time, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is something that's very real. And it is caused, unfortunately, by THC in some people, and the cessation of symptoms and everything stops once you stop ingesting THC. So that is very important to note. Good question.
Liz, we have a question in the chat box.
Oh, yeah. Is
Is there any guideline on what the THC CBD ratio is best for what condition?
So we'll address more of that in the next topic webinar, because there's so much to go over. But typically cancer, the 1-to-1 ratio has been said to be the best for cancer treatments, and that's 1 part CBD to 1 part THC. That allows you to get the maximum THC and CBD and still mitigate psychoactivity. But the thing is, like I just said, CBD may not be good with some medications, so it's challenging to kind of say a blanket, but like a blanket ratio. Certain cancers, THC is really what you want. And it's hard because THC is going to cause psychoactivity. So for certain cancers like glioblastoma and other things, the dosage regimen is a really high THC. Certain times that can make you uncomfortably high. So it's always trying to manage, fighting the cancer, but also, quality of life and enjoying that. The ratio I'd suggest for people, if you have no idea what you're doing, just starting, is go with a 1-to-1 ratio, because then you're getting THC and CBD, and you should be getting the benefits of both, but not having too much psychoactivity and not having an excessive amount of CBD in your system to slow down any processing of medication. Okay, is there any clinical trials for cancer fighting properties of cannabinoids and terpenes? Clinical trials, I know there's a lot of research. I know in Israel, there's a lot of research being done. I don't know offhand of any clinical trials. You can go to, I think it's clinicaltrials.gov, or I can provide the website, but that they have information about all the clinical trials that are ongoing. I am not aware of one, like, I can't think of one specific clinical trial at the moment, but I'm happy to follow up on that offline. And then someone says, if I'm taking a cancer vaccine or immunotherapy, and I've been told not to use. Yeah, so, if your doctor says that cannabis is not recommended for your condition, I would definitely look into it and ask why they are. But I personally, even though I've worked with cannabis for over 18 years, I probably, if I had cancer, someone in my family, I wouldn't rely on cannabis as the sole method of treating it, unless all other options were exhausted, because cannabis is a part of a treatment with other things. Cannabis, like anything, has side effects. As we just talked about with the hyperemesis syndrome, some people who are younger men, and they're like under 25, are somewhat more prone to, when they use high THC, prone to psychosis. So it's not something that's without any harm, but as you can see, it's something that's been used by society and humans for centuries without, serious harm. So unfortunately, there's not like hard and fast rules with this a lot. As you can see, we're still learning a lot, and providing you with this information hopefully helps you be more empowered to make best decisions for yourself and your healthcare. So let's see, I'll look and see if we have any other Q&A here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Liz Rogan. I'm excited to be back with you in a month. If you enter in any questions, I'll be sure to address those next time. I do have some questions that Aki sent me from that we'll address further in the next webinar, but please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to try to follow up or answer more questions. It's a lot of information in a small amount of time, so I hope you're able to absorb some of that. Well, thank you so much for joining. I will join your Facebook group so I can help answer questions there. And thank you, Aki, for having me. And thank you to our production team. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Like, thank you so much for joining in. And I wish you happiness and health. Take care.